No, he just put his knuckle back.
Oh.
Yosha knows it better. I don't know really. So what we've been speaking about in these series of shiurim is trying to understand Avodat Hashem. Ma ze Avodat Hashem? And we saw it from many different angles. Basically, as we also saw from the openings of Mishnah Berurah, Avodat Hashem means to add Kvod Shamayim in the world. Worship, I don't understand what it means. I know what Avodah means. It means to work. We're here as workers. We're Palim. We're workers, as it says also in Pirkei Avot. Melacha Merubah and Poalim Atzelim and the Balabayit Dochek. Our whole relationship on this level between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is that of a Balabayit and Poalim. We're here to work. Adam la'amal yulad. I put you in this world to work. Going maybe in levels that they're not conscious of how they're working for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's an interesting Gemara in Masechet Avodah Zarah, how at the end of days they ask credit to get Sachar at the end of days because of what they added to the world. Hashem said, no. I used you as my worker, but you weren't conscious of it, and therefore out. No Sachar, they go out and bullshit. But even the Gemara says, the first step of Avodah Zarah, Kacha Matchila Masechet. But those of us who are conscious of the fact that we're workers for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so that a completely different quality of work, we work not in a way that we're being used, not even being aware of the avoda and the plot and the skits and the drama mystery. But if we're conscious of it, then we don't only participate in working for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we also participate in it in a way that we get sachar over. But in any case, ריבוי כבוד שמיים בעולם. כל מה שברא הקדוש ברוך הוא בעולמו לא בראו אלא לכבודו, as Pirkei Avot finishes, and therefore our avodah is to participate in adding kavod shamayim in the world. The way we defined it already before, if you will remember, we're talking about a specific midah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, midat malchut Hashem, which is the way in which Hashem appears in this world of olam hazeh, in the world of space, in the world of time, and that is what we mean when we talk about kavod Hashem. Kvod Hashem maleh et hamishkan. When Hashem makes His appearance in our world, at the top of our Sinai, or in the Mishkan, it's always going to be in the concept of kavod. Kadosh, kadosh, kadosh is referring to Kadosh Baruch Hu as beyond this world. Meloch ol haaretz, kavodo, when Hashem makes His appearance here in the Aretz, it becomes kvod Hashem. Okay? Hashem מאוד מאוד להעריך. One can go deeper and deeper into these concepts. We spoke about it in certain aspects. However, when Hashem appears in time and in space, in the world of freedom of choice, everything that are the characteristics of Olam Hazeh, we talk about Kvod Shamayim, Hashem revealing Himself with His Kavod. Now, we may have mentioned this before, but there are many different names that we will find for this revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is Him revealing Himself in this world specifically. One name, as we've been talking about, is Kvod Hashem or Kvod Shamayim. Another name for the Kvod Hashem is the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah, it's a later term, the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah refers exactly to that. That is Hashem appearing, dwelling here as neighboring with me, hence the similarity to the word in Lashon HaKodesh, Shechen. This is where the word Mishkan comes from, because that's where the dwelling place of the Shekhinah. Mikan Hashem Mishkan. Notice Dafka, the Mishkan is referred to on the basis of this shorish of Shechen, and not Beit HaMikdash, because the Mishkan travels with us wherever we go in our processes in the world, in our journeys. HaKadosh Baruch Hu joins along with us. Kol makom shegalu, later on also Shechina imahem. So the Hashem traveling with us in Olam Hazeh and all the processes and journeys that we need to go through, it's always going to be referred to as the Shechina. Beit HaMikdash is a different Bechina. We don't find specifically that it's defined as such. The Gemara does say Matzinu Mikdash Shekavui Mishkan and Mishkan Shekavui Mikdash. We find that each have this two Bechinot, but the question is, what is the name? So what's dominant and emphasized in the Mishkan is the Shekhinah. What's dominant and emphasized in the Beit HaMikdash is the Kedusha aspect. But in any case, so the Shekhinah is that aspects of the Elokut, that aspects of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that makes its appearance and dwells with us here in this world. When we say, for example, Hashem Yichud Kud Shabrichu Shchintei, some say it before Adlakat Nerot, some say it before different mitzvot, however far back that goes, the meaning of that is based on the Mekubalim. Maybe we spoke about it in these shiurim already, and maybe in the future we'll talk about it more. And that is according to Baalei Kabbalah, Kol Avodat Hashem, Tfilot, Brachot, Kol Avodat Hashem, זה לחבר בין הקדוש ברוך הוא לבין השכינה. And therefore, before mitzvot, I say Hashem Yichud, I'm doing this for the kavanah of unifying HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Shechina. Without going into it too much right now, just based on what we've said till now, is that my mind, my kavanah is to unify Hashem, infinite and beyond this world, is all-encompassing, with the Gilui Shechina, which is here in these events or in this reality and time and space right now. They're one. In my mind, I'm supposed to unify them, and that's a big lifelong challenge. In any case, על המנורה בבית המקדש כתוב בחז"ל, and they base it on psukim in the Torah, and that is that menorah specifically is that part of the Mishkan or the Mikdash, and that we say about it, eduti lechol ba'ei olam she'ashchina shora b'Yisrael. The menorah is the testimony lechol ba'ei olam, to the entire world, to all creations in the world, to all humans in the world. The menorah serves as an edut she'ashchina shora b'Yisrael. Now, if we know, this is based on the Ramban and based on Chazal, that our own private menorah that we light on Chanukah is the miniature menorah of Beit HaMikdash. It's the same menorah of Beit HaMikdash, but now it's in my own private setting, not in Beit HaMikdash, but rather in my own private bayit. That's Kayadua, the Ramban, based on Chazal, based on the Medrash Tanchuma, that as we switch from Parshat Nasa, which we're going to be reading, that's going to be the laning for Chanukah. This shift from Parshat Nasa to Parshat Ba'alotcha, that all the Nisim, the different Shvatim, bring their korbanot to Chanukat Mishkan, and when we complete 1 year from Yetziat Mitzrayim, and the Mishkan is completed, and the Shechina comes into the Mishkan, and Aaron is concerned, but he, as being the Nasim Shevet Levi, does not bring any, so Hashem says to him, yours is greater. The korbanot are dependent on the presence of the Beit HaMikdash, but the menorah, it remains forever. Where does it remain forever? The menorah also gets to be taken by the Romans and also gets to be destroyed with the rest of the Klei Mikdash, just like the Mizmach. But that's so says the Ramban, or I think maybe already Chazal and the Tanchuma, is that Mikan, this is a remez already in the Torah Shebechtav for the future Chanukah to come, because the menorah does continue for eternity in our own private menorah, in our Chanukiah, and a Chanukah of Beit Chashmonai that establishes for us the Dorot, Hadlakat HaMenorah, that's a reappearing of the menorah in Beit HaMikdash. It's not just a nice linkage of ideas. Chazal say it's a reappearance of that same menorah. And therefore, we can say the following. I think it will make perfect sense to say. In the same way that the macro menorah of Klal Yisrael serves as a eduti lechol ba'ei olam she'ashchina shora b'Yisrael, so the miniature menorah serves as a eduti lechol ba'ei olam she'ashchina shora b'bayit hazeh. This menorah that's lit at the door or at the window of this house, this is a testimony lechol ba'ei olam, lechol ba'ei olam she'ashchina shora b'bayit hazeh, just in terms of the kavanah that a person should have. Especially B'ezrat Hashem when he has his own bayit. By B'ezrat Hashem, the right timing for everybody here in this room. It's a different experience. You'll see B'ezrat Hashem lighting a menorah. You get to experience a little bayit aspect without going through all the halachic nafkaminot and discussions that I'm sure Rav Ami gave over to you in terms of what extent does the bayit play a role in lighting the menorah. I do remember, for example, Rosh Shlomo Zalman writing, he's critical of people who go on to you and don't don't rent a hotel room or don't get a zimmer, but rather they sleep out in the opening and sleeping bags, and they like that. I know people that do that, so we like their menorah out in the opening, and Shlomo Zalman very much against it, and that is that you're mafkir yourself to a great extent to the mitzvah, but the fact you're stepping outside of the reality of the bayit, which is the whole setting of their Chanukah in the first place. But in any case, so in the same way that Chazal said that in terms of the menorah Beit HaMikdash, we can say that about our own menorah. That is eduti lekol ba'ei olam she'ashchina shora b'Yisrael. I thought about earlier today, Rabbi, maybe there is a certain side over here with the halachic nafkamina. I know that there's a machlokes posting that you know much more about than I in terms of whether or not the menorah or Chanukah is we're yotze with goyim seeing it. What? Who says what? Do you know?
What? There was some meetings of
in the Shlomo Zalman. So, מעניין מאוד. I don't think you can bring a raya necessarily from a machshavet idea halacha lema'aseh, but from if this equation is correct, eduti l'chol ba'ei olam she'ashchina shora b'Yisrael, there is a tzad to say that also in terms of our own Chanukah, eduti l'chol ba'ei olam, not only to the Jews she'ashchina shora b'bayit hazeh specifically. Now, having all this in mind may serve as something of an understanding and background for what we have in front of us, and that is the closing halachot in the Chol Chanukah, the Rambam. I like going through it every year in different shiurim. It's very thought-provoking how the Rambam, who's a master of organization, it's one of his incredible, unique talents. Everybody in this room has learned enough Talmud Bavli to see how mebulbal it actually is. That's not my chiddush. The Gemara says it's itself, and that is she's a balul or even mebulbal, and that is it's very different than our Western textbooks that we're familiar with, which is what frustrates so many of our younger guys here in yeshiva every single year. The fact that it's just so all over the place. It's one big chaos. They don't understand it's very much a planned out and an organized chaos, to force you to organize the mess, and through that get an understanding and make a kinyan in any havana is by creating a binyan and creating some kind of organization of what's going on over there. But in any case, the Gemara itself is all over the place, and you need somebody as gigantic as the Rambam to be able to be the first one in history to take an entire Talmud Bavli and to organize it into topics and subtopics and halachot and svarim. It's just unbelievable that one brain was able to do that. Either way, what I'm trying to say is that when you learn Rambam, not enough to try to understand the actual content of any halakha and any specific item that he brings out. What's very significant, specifically when it comes to the Rambam, is the way he organizes his halachot. Now, the halachot that he chooses to finish off Chol Chanukah with, if you're familiar with the sugiyot of Chanukah in the second Shabbat, they appear there in the middle of the different halachot, and yet the Rambam chooses to finish off all the Hilchot Chanukah, specifically dafka to complete it, that the bottom line of Hilchot Chanukah should be with these specific halachot. And it starts off with halakha yudbet, look inside, please, with a very atypical statement, and not so clear where he actually takes this from. Mitzvah ner Chanukah, mitzvah chaviva yad me'od. You would think you would hear this line in a Sefer Chassidut on Chanukah, and there are many, but in a halachic book like the Rambam, you would find such a... The Rambam doesn't give tziyunim grades to mitzvot, and yet here he does. Mitzvah ner Chanukah, mitzvah חביבה יד מאוד, so much so, וצריך אדם להיזהר בה כדי להודיע הנס ולהוסיף בשבח האל ולהודיה לו על הניסים שעשה לנו אפילו אין לו מה יאכל אלא מן הצדקה, שואל או מוכר כסותו ולוקח שמן ונרות ומדליק. There's a lot of implication to this חביבות, and yet this לשון specifically that it's a מצווה חביבה מאוד. I wonder if it comes from someplace in Chazal or it actually is his own לשון.
The Magnification
says that that's the
regular economy of the building.
Right.
It's interesting. What's the connection between
in the chavifut of that? Right. So we're going to halacha yud gimel. Hareisha, we're going to the rest of the halachic implications that come from this, and that is when we started here a competition, so to speak, between Ner Chanukah and other mitzvot. Hareisha, pruta ela pruta achat. ולפניו קידוש היום והדלקת נר חנוכה. He has enough money, and he has to make a choice between yain for קידוש היום, which is very self-free, not קידוש but the yain, והדלקת נר חנוכה. מקדים לקנות שמן להדליק נר חנוכה על היין לקידוש היום. Why? הואיל בשניהם are the same status, and that is מדברי סופרים, מוטב להקדים נר חנוכה שיש פה זיכרון הנס. Because of זיכרון הנס, פרסום הניסן, חנוכה and light candles override and take precedence over wine for kiddush b'Shabbat because of zikaron hanes, and it sounds might be the continuation of the expression of that title for these closing halachot. That is again mitzvah ner Chanukah, mitzvah chaviva yad me'od. Maybe one can expand it out here that it's so much so that overrides the wine of kiddush b'Shabbat. And then the Rambam chooses to close up all halachot Chanukah as such. And that is הלכה י"ד. היה לפניו נר ביתו ונר חנוכה, או נר ביתו וקידוש היום. נר ביתו קודם משום שלום ביתו. But when it comes to נר חנוכה versus נר ביתו, מה זה נר ביתו? Ner Shabbat. So then Ner Shabbat takes precedence, and you will buy shemen for Nerot Shabbat and not for Nerot Chanukah. Why? Because Mishum Shlom Beito, because of Shlom Bayit, that we know. The Gemara and Rashi Masechet Shabbat that Nerot Shabbat have to do with Shlom Bayit. So much so the Rambam goes on and says Sharei Hashem Ben Sota Nimchak Lasot Shalom Ben Ish V'Ishto. So much so that the Rambam finishes off on his grand ending Gadol HaShalom Shekol HaTorah Nitna Lasot Shalom Ba'olam Shenemar Derachei Darkei Noam B'chol Netivoteha Shalom. Okay, now this is quite surprising. What's surprising? Remember, the Rambam is this master of organization. So he's very, very, very picky in terms of what he chooses to put where and what he chooses to finish off the halachot with. What's surprising in this note? Yes, Rav?
So he concludes a mitzvah with I don't know if this concludes Hilchot Chanukah.
It does.
Yeah, so he concludes Hilchot Chanukah with a time we're not supposed to buy.
After concluding Hilchot Chanukah, where Chanukah submits itself to another mitzvah. It's a little surprising that Ner Chanukah has to go bow down to another mitzvah, and not to end off with that note where the whole point that you were trying to build up and bring Hilchot Chanukah to peak, mitzvah Chavivah Yad Me'od, and override something else. You finish off that in a place that it has to bow down and give the space to another mitzvah. That's number one. Number two is not so typical. You do find that sometimes, but it's not so typical. The Rambam, to finish off a group of halachot with this grand ending, he's not at all busy giving drashot. He's giving over halachot, and yet he does choose here. There are some other places, not many, that he finishes off on this. It's not a drasha. What's the point of going on and on about how great the shalom is? That in the context of Hilchot Chanukah, Unless there's something about the concept of shalom that the Rambam sees that deep down underlying all of Chanukah, that's really the bottom line of it all. That Chanukah is about producing a reality of shalom, and therefore he will end off on this ending. But if that's true, one has to show that, and one has to prove that. So what we've spoken in the past, and I don't want to spend time on that, I want to go to another level today, is that there's that medrash, you asked me about it the other day, in Gershon, Midrash Naaseh Chanukah, it appears in different forms in different midrashim. We don't have many midrashei Chazal on Chanukah, but there is this medrash that describes that the process of the decrees of the Greeks against us. And it starts off with the first gzera against the Jews is that any Jew that has a lock on his door, Manuda Petach Beito Yidaker B'Cherab, will be put to death. And it continues on to the fact that, I don't remember the whole series, it's been some years since I've seen this medrash inside, but at some point there was a gezerah that the Jews are not, the women are not allowed to go to the mikveh, so they had this, nest, and the homes had these springs coming through their floors, and finally the whole process ends with that gezerah. Of course, that's real. We all know that from the Gemara Masechet Ketubot, Kol HaNiseh Tibayel Legmon Chilai Mipnei a Jewish girl who's going to be married the night before she needs to be taken by the Greek leader of the place. And the Medrash continues and gives over the actual story where Yehudit, the sister of the Chashmonaim, was about to get married the next night, and for that night she was going to be taken by the Greek leader, and she gets out on the table and she starts screaming at her brothers. When it came to the days of Dinah and Shechem, Levi and Shimon got up and killed the whole city, and my brothers are not doing anything, you're letting me go and be taken by this goy? And they hear this, and they take out their swords and they go out to war, and that's the way the war breaks out. Okay, that's the place that Medrash brings out Chanukah and the whole war between us and the Greeks on this level, which is a little different than what we usually hear in the Sfarim, which mainly puts forth Chochmat Torah versus Chochmat Yavan on multiple different levels, but that the Greeks actually attempted to destroy the Bayit of Klal Yisrael, the Bayit of Yehudi, as being the stronghold of the Klal Yisrael. That we don't hear as much, and that seems to be what the Medrash is pointing out. Now, if that is the case, it might be then that Ner Chanukah is producing the same thing that Ner Shabbat is producing, and that is that, as we said, Eduti l'kol ba'olam she'ashchina shora b'Yisrael. So the menorah on this specific home in Chanukah says, Eduti l'kol ba'olam she'ashchina shora b'bayit hazeh, ish v'isha zachu shchina v'nehem. We might have to take into consideration that at the depth of the meaning of the menorah of Chanukah, it's really maybe reflecting outdoors what the Nerot Shabbat do all year round. That is producing a reality and expressing a reality of Shalom Bayit, of Ish V'Isha Zachu Shechina B'Nehem. Once a year, at the time of the year that we've been put into conflict, specifically in this area, so we actually light it out, and not only in the house, but we light it out. If that's the case, so then it makes sense, and we spoke about this in the past, and that is that the Rambam would dafka put down the bottom line halacha where Ner Chanukah submits itself to another mitzvah. It's not submitting itself to another mitzvah, it's submitting itself to its own source. Because if Ner Chanukah is a branch of a certain tree, that is what Nerot Shabbat produce, no wonder that Ner Chanukah is going to be cancelled. You're not going to have the branch if you don't have the tree. Ner Chanukah is only reflecting outwards what Ner Shabbat does all year round. That's the level that we've spoken about in the past. But what I would like to discuss more so today has to do with our concepts of kavod that we've been trying to deal with in terms of Kvod Hashem, Kvod Shamayim, and for that, let's go deeper. I don't know if we mentioned in the past few shiurim, but we do find the concept of kavod appearing quite a few times in the Torah. And often the term kavod, Hashem appears with it, it's specifically with the term in the context of ananim, ananei kavod. Clouds. Kavod comes with ananim. Ma mashma'ut. What do ananim produce? What kind of reality do clouds produce? What? Well, rain on the one hand, that's true.
It's blurry.
Huh?
One can't see.
It hides. The ananim creates some kind of a reality of tzniut. How that relates to rain, that's a very, very, very interesting question. Because you can't say that there's two different aspects in rain that have nothing to do with each other. Can't say that rain happens to be about tzniut, clouds, ananim have to do with tzniut, and kisui. Mitzad sheni, ananim has to do with rain.
Rain is bracha.
What?
Rain is bracha.
Ve'ena baracha b'tzvayala b'dedas l'minayim.
It's Torah, right.
What?
Water is Torah. Only get Torah, that's new.
If you're already mentioning all this, there's the Gemara Masechet Tamid, that is Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mitra Ba'ala De'arav, that the rain is the husband of the earth. He's kept his authorship. We have to pray out that he should relate to us as a husband and bestow life onto us. And when a husband comes to bestow life onto his wife, it has to be done with tzniut. It needs to be covered. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu also covers, quote unquote, his hashpa'ah. The day of rain is the day that the world gets to be covered up in clouds. These are my thoughts on that. I haven't seen it inside, but because otherwise it doesn't make sense to me. It can't be that the ananim have two different roles that have nothing to do with each other. So lo yitachen, ha'anan ze mitziut echad. יכול להיות שזה שני ביטויים שונים. In any case, in terms of our inyan, and that is that in terms of tzniut, kavod goes with tzniut. Kavod goes with tzniut. Think about it, a person or a woman who's not tsanua, kavod we don't have towards her. She doesn't radiate kavod. However you define kavod. We don't have respect, even if you use a simple translation into English, to a woman who's not modest. A person may be drawn, her physical urges and animalistic lower urges may be drawn to, but that's not from a place of respect whatsoever. There's no respect involved, there's no kavod. And that goes together with the pasuk in Sefer Mishlei, a famous pasuk, Kvod Elokim Haster Davar. Kvod Hashem goes with hiding. Kavod Olech im Haster. And that's why no wonder that kavod always appears with Hashem, always with ananim. Let's try to understand a little deeper what we're talking about and how this may relate to Chanukah. We know the Gemara in Masechet Chulin, I'll just borrow this as an example, goes through the different images of Purim and asks, yes, Purim, not Chanukah for a moment, and asks these different images, Minatorah Minayin, Haman, Minatorah Minayin, and Esther, Minatorah Minayin, and Mordechai, Minatorah Minayin, and Moshe is deeply related to the Purim also, Minatorah Minayin, and we get, of course, to the surprising one that is Moshe, Minatorah Minayin. That was the previous one was Mordechai. I'm sorry, Moshe Minatorah Minayin, which is of course surprising. Of course, I mean, Moshe it's Torah Moshe. Zichrot Torah Moshe Avdikasub B'Sefer Malachim. The point is that by all of them, what we're talking about, what's the early appearance of these images earlier on in Torah where they come out full appearance? What's their original appearance? What's their shorish? So I would say the same thing when it comes to Chanukah as well. And I would ask a similar question, that is, Chanukah min Torah minayin, where do we begin finding the conflict between Israel and Yavan that comes out in the days of Bayit Sheni, after Chitum HaTanakh completely, and yet, if we were to ask, the Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim, so to speak, the early origins of Yavan and Israel fighting with each other, where does it go back to? Huh? So it goes back to, yes, it goes back into the splitting of the nations in Parshat Noach. And it specifically starts off with an episode that starts off the new mankind, which we have in front of us. Look at this sheet. So let's read inside. This is obviously not just a sample from Noah's life. This is the event that's going to end up doing nothing less dramatic than defining the three building blocks of the new mankind: Shem, Cham, and Yefet. It's from these that the whole 70 nations of the world come out, including the 71st, which is of course the future Klal Yisrael. But where it all stems from this episode. And Noach goes drunk, ויחל נוח איש האדמה ויתעקר, ויש מן היין וישכר, ויתגל בתוך אוהלו. He's exposed in his tent. And Cham comes, ויד חם אבי כנען, את ערוות אביו, ויגד לשני אחיו בחוץ. On the basis of that, he's cursed, and on the basis of that, we're not surprised that Cham is going to be producing historically the lines of Mitzrayim and Canaan, and other, but his two most central children and offspring that come from him are Mitzrayim and Canaan, that define our Arayot B'Torah. Parashat Arayot that we read on Yom Kippur Mincha. כמעשה ארץ מצרים אשר יצאת משם וכמעשה ארץ כנען אשר בא שמה לא תעשו. Then we give the whole list of Arayot. What is the origins of the behavior of Arayot of Mitzrayim and Canaan? Cham. The same Cham who does this Ma'aseh of Arayot here with his father, whatever opinion of the Gemara that you take. Same Cham that the Gemara in Chulin tells us that he did not obey the rule of not to have relations on Teva, which means that the Mabul is to be seen as the mikveh for the world, which is far to talk about that it is. I think it's already brought down in Chinuch actually. So then that mikveh does not purify Cham. And he somehow behaves like the Dor Mabul even after the Mabul. No wonder that Mitzrayim and Canaan are going to be defining Arayot in the new world order. But it's a continuation of the Dor Mabul's chaos and Tum'ah. That's Cham. But then comes Vayikach Shem Vayefet et השמלה וישימו על שכם שניהם וילכו אחורנית ויחסו את ערוות אביהם ופניהם אחורנית וערוות אביהם לא ראו. And then Noach wakes up, understands what happens, curses one, blesses others. That's where we get to Yaft Elohim liyefet. This is where we find the origins of the relationship that the Gemara Megillah actually darshans as to the relationship between the future Yefet in the world, who Yefet par excellence of course is Yavan. We learn from that, according to one opinion, you can only translate the Torah into one other language, and that is Greek. And based on this pasuk, there is a place for Yefet to dwell in the tents of Shem, and yet he doesn't get the same bracha of Shem. Now the question, of course, is, as opposed to Cham, the two other sons respond differently. Just to understand, Hashem puts forth, that's my understanding, a scenario, and we get three different responses. Tell me how you respond to an exposed father who's drunk in the tent, and I'll tell you who you are. It draws out who your identity is, and nothing less than that. And that's true for ultimately all our circumstances in our life. Many situations are put forth daily. How we respond draw out who we are, or what we should be working on, or bringing us to the realization who I am now, who should I become as a result of working on my midah. The same thing over here. So, in terms of the response of Shem and Yefet, what would be the difference between the two? They don't get the same bracha. Shem gets a quote-unquote better bracha than Yefet. But they both cover the father. They're both sensitive to this situation, and they understand it needs to be covered up. And yet, one gets the main bracha, one gets like a passive secondary bracha. What's the difference between the two? We do know, based on the pasuk Vayikach Shem Vayefet, what's lacking here grammatically. Right? Very good. It doesn't say Vayikhu, as you would think. It says Vayikach Shem Vayefet. So on the basis of that, it's brought down that Shem was the initiative. Yefet joined along. Is it that only? Maybe it's more. But for that, we need to see these figures in a broader historical view. Because if we think of Yefet for a moment, and the way he comes out of history is in the form of Yavan, he doesn't have such a problem actually with being naked. In fact, in the Olympic Games, in the days of the Greeks, or standing in front of somebody who's doing art, picture or sculpture, having the body completely exposed, is perfectly okay. So Yefet, what is this? Are you kind of sensitive to covering your father? Just putting on an act? The answer, Yefet would probably say, no, I'm not putting on an act at all. But look at my name. What's my name? Yefet, which means beauty. This scene is not beautiful. It's actually it's not beautiful at all. It's quite ugly. It's not aesthetic, and that's what I'm bothered by, so therefore I'm going to cover it up. But when the situation is that the context brings out the beauty of the human body, let it be exposed, by all means, whether it's in sports or in the arts. That means that when Yefet is sensitive to the issue of tzniut, it may come from a completely different place than where Shem comes from. The question is, where does Shem come from? If Yefet covers up because it's not aesthetic, on the basis of what does Shem cover up? Anybody who ever wants to give a shir in tzniut, this is a great place to start. This is the opening episode of the entire new mankind. Is predicated and based, and then people are going to be defined these three different groups based on nothing less than tzniut. To that extent, it's central to the entire existence of mankind. Three levels of tzniut: Cham, Yefet, Shem. So why does Shem cover? I would suspect that in the same way that by Yefet, his sensitivity for covering his father has to do with his name, that by Shem also. But that's not such an easy name. Right? Shem. One has to discuss obviously also the name Cham. It's not for now. In order to deal with this, let's go a little into Yanei Chanukah, and we'll come back to this. Hashem. What is it about, with all we spoke about, and if indeed there is, as we spoke about earlier, an aspect of shalom that comes out in candles. Shalom Bayit. Whether it's in Nerot Shabbat, whether it's in Nerot Chanukah. I mean, just to understand, the way of thinking over here is that clearly, just like we said before, that an Anan is one reality. It may have different manifestations. So also when it comes to Ner, whatever in there is in the thought process of Torah, it's going to have to express itself in Chanukah, it's going to have to express itself in Shabbat, or any other place that we have Nerot. But the Ner is one thing. I mean, in my mind, it cannot be that Nerot Shabbat mean one thing, and Nerot Chanukah means something else completely. Because the Ner is one Mitziut. How it manifests may have different appearances, but there's one concept behind it. And therefore, again, no wonder that we should expect that there should be this theme, as we find in the Rambam, that common theme between Nerot Chanukah and Nerot Shabbat that may have to do really with Shalom or with Shalom Bayit. But specifically, why dafka with Nerot? Where else do we find Nerot? So we have a pasuk, famous pasuk in Sefer Mishlei, Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam. Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam. And the Neshama shel Ben Adam is compared by Chacham Mikol Adam in Sefer Mishlei to like a Ner of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A candle of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Neshama of a person. Each of us possesses a Neshama, which is a Ner of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Baalei Kabbalah go on and on about these things. They go and elaborate on what a Ner is, because we have to remember what a Ner in Chazal is different than our Ner. It's not just like a wax candle. We're talking about a Kli with Shemen and a Ptila, and then the Lehava, fire, which produces the light. And each of these different levels corresponds to different aspects of man. But just on my simple understanding of that is another pasuk in Sefer Mishlei, and that is Chochmat Adam Ta'ir Panav. Chochmat Adam Ta'ir Panav. We don't have any other part of the body that shines up and lights up, but by certain people, especially people who work on themselves a lot, you see that they have panim me'irot. Wow, it's a ha'arat panim. Take a Shana Aleph guy who came from New York and the first day in Elul, and go with him to Rav and don't tell me this person's face doesn't shine. I think if he's somewhat in touch with this himself, he's nachon. Sham ha'arat panim, sham ha'ara miyuchedet, chochmat adam ta'ir panav. We see from this that the neshama of a person is not just like some kind of a flaky idea. The neshama of a person really has to do with some kind of reality which is related to light. And when a person's relationship with his body is clean enough and pure enough, his neshama shines through his face. The panim really me'idim al panim. The neshama me'ira derech hapanim. What it means is as such: a human being is made up of two parts, a guf and a neshama. A guf on the outside, and a neshama inside. The guf, especially in our world of today of medicine, and science and technology we're very familiar with. We can measure, we can put it under a microscope, we can quantify it, we can explain it better and better as the generations go by. But in the inside of it rests another level that, as I always say here in yeshiva, in different opportunities, even if you use the secular term, the mind, science till today has no clue what that is. The brain, yes, we know a lot about brain neurology today, but we don't have any clue as to what the mind is or what mind stuff is made up of. We experience our mind, but we have no understanding what it is. זה משהו נסתר לחלוטין מאיתנו. So we have two layers. On the outside layer, I have a garment of a body, which I understand, which I see, which I can touch, which I can measure, which I can quantify. But on the inside of it, there's another layer, which is completely unquantifiable. And I completely cannot touch it, and I cannot understand it, and I cannot make any sense of it, and I don't know at all what it actually is and what it's made up of. ידוע, כתוב בספרים, that tzaddikim throughout the generations would sit for long periods of time and would just be מתבוננים בנרות. כך כתוב, בהרבה מקומות, many סיפורי צדיקים, just sit and reflect the candles. ומה מתבוננים? מה אמורים לחשוב? מה הנר אמור לעורר in this process of התבוננות? I always define התבוננות in general as the Avram Avinu's way of not settling for the garment level of the world, but penetrating through the garments to try to understand, to see, and to tap into the essence that's lying behind the garment. That's a pair of terms that's found a lot in the Mekubalim. כל דבר בעולם שלנו בא עם לבוש, on the outside, mahut on the inside. A human being, guf on the outside, that's the levush. Mahut on the inside, that is his neshama. But in our world of Olam Hazeh, we never chap what a mahut of anything is. We get to see it through its appearance through the levush. And therefore, I would suspect, and I'd like to suggest the following: when tzaddikim throughout the generations sit and are being mitbonen banerot, it's a type of an exercise to try to tap into ner Hashem nishmat adam, whether it's themselves and trying to tap into the neshama, which is hiding in the inside and behind, quote unquote, their body, or it's on others to be able to see other people's neshamot. Dafka at the time of the year when we come to clash with the Yavan, that puts forth the human being as basically a body and nothing past that. And in our generation, it has its own manifestation when the world loses its tzniut, and everything that the door after the Mabul took upon themselves to Gdoret Atzmam Min Arayot basically is on the verge of completely collapsing. And when the world loses its shame and loses its tzniut, so we are being bombarded with a society that's trying to force us and brainwash to think that a human being is nothing but a body, being very wrapped up in issues of looks and aesthetics, and very much a reappearing of Yefet and Yavan into the world. And in such a situation, we get an opportunity to do an internal clarification with ourselves. So who am I? What am I? Efo ani munach? In which part in me do I exist? Am I only a body? No, I'm too firm for that. But am I a body and a soul? Ani guf and neshama? Or maybe I'm a neshama and a guf? That's very, very different. Very different. It's not the difference of order. It's primarily who am I and what's versus that secondary. יש לנו עוד כמה דקות, אבל. I don't know if I mentioned this in one of these shurim, but I remember a year and a half ago, I think I did mention it in the panel that we had in DRS on dating in the Facebook era. So they got into a whole discussion. There was one of the alumni asked whether, what do we think as to when you hear about the name of a girl, you immediately go into check her picture on the computer. I usually let other people speak before me in these panels, but this time I jumped at the opportunity, and I thought maybe I'm just from an old school, and an old geezer doesn't know much about computers, but I spoke very, 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 very much against it, at least for our guys, because it's giving into a Yefet world, and where beauty very much takes over. And in that panel, I don't know if I remember if Rami was there or not, but in that panel, I felt quite uncomfortable. There were quite a few married couples there, and the issue of looks and beauty and dating was just going on and on and I felt very uncomfortable. I didn't know what to do with myself. You're sitting there, all the guys are looking at you, and I felt uncomfortable, especially for the women there. So at some point, and then two best lines were said there. One by Mrs. Bina, and one by Rabbi Yoel, my friend Rabbi Yoel Rakovsky, and the two bring out the two sides of one coin. And that is, at some point in the middle of that discussion, Baruch Hashem, Mrs. Bina picked up her hand and wanted to say something, and said to the guys, it's not like you guys look that great. And that shut down the whole conversation, put everything in the proper context. I loved it. I gave her such a yishar koach afterwards. Masa, he's sitting here, but as a mishtech hashverosh. These are more beautiful. Those are more beautiful. It's not love you develop in public. You have issues with yourself with these issues. Go and talk to somebody personally. But to make it a public discussion, mamash, I don't think it was nice. It wasn't proper, especially when married women are there. It's a lo yafeh. Of course, it brings up their own insecurities in terms of their looks. It's a lo beseder. But later on, when they were asking about dating, Rabbi Yoel, and they asked, where would we sitting there in the panel recommend that where a person should date? How dating should happen, where should it take place. And Rav Yoel gave such a simple, beautiful answer, so typical of him. And that is that he recommended, instead of going and sitting in a restaurant, especially in Manhattan, you can barely hear the person sitting in there. Everybody's like coming in, other couples, and he says the best place is to, if you can, to go sit somewhere out in nature. Because in nature, the neshama comes out. That's the way Rav Yoel put it. And because that's ultimately what you're looking for in a person. Jewish dating is you're looking for a neshama. You're not looking for a body. And that's very, very different than often what we come with and the influences that we have from all kind of hashbot that we have from the way we grew up. And it's a big avodah to peel off these issues. But that ultimately we're looking to become two neshamot that are reflected in two candles every single Shabbat, producing shlom bayit, defining this home as a house of two neshamot. That's what the two candles represent. And every single neshama that comes forth, Minhag Yisrael Kedoshim, is to add another candle for each child. There's another neshama in the house. But the core of the shalom bayit over here is two neshamot. This is a house of two neshamot. And if it's a home, if it's a marriage which is based on the fact that there's two neshamot living in this house, happen to have bodies, but this home is a home of two neshamot. This is not a nice idea for Sheva Brachot. This is a different quality of marriage completely. You relate to each other differently. You have different expectations. What starts kicking in is, first of all, kavod for each other. Respect for each other. We don't respect bodies. We may be attracted to bodies. This is where we differ from animals. We don't have respect for a hippopotamus, right? Or for our dog. We don't have respect for animals. We have respect for humans. So what's the difference? We both have bodies. I have and a hippopotamus has. What's the difference? That I have a neshama and he does not have. And that's why people have kavod attached to them. And when it comes to animals, they don't. That means that the kavod has to do with the neshama of a person. But what this means is, the neshama we saw before is a reality which is in the inside, hiding inside. Kavod Elokim haster davar. The body is on the outside and it's appeared. And I can see it and it's exposed. And it's accessible, and it's easy to get. Neshama is hiding in the inside, and hence the kavod that goes along with it. Again, a home that's predicated on the fact that there is two neshamot, the relationship ultimately produces kavod, ha'aracha, appreciation for each other, and ultimately also love. Love doesn't belong to bodies. Lust belongs to bodies. Love belongs to neshamot. When it's properly done, and it's a proper kavanah of kedusha, so everything is elevated, and of course also the tava is elevated to go along together with the ahava. But ahava is leading the way, and the tava is only there to join together. But in our society, that's often not the case, and they're split away from each other. Mamash, just to finish off on another level, just another angle to think about, and not on a micro level that we've been talking about, on a macrocosmic level. We have to remember that Chanukah takes place in the context of Bayit Sheni. It's the Moed of Bayit Sheni. Every Moed comes exactly at the timing to prepare Klal Yisrael for that stage in history. Purim comes to prepare us for a new stage from now to the end of days. Hashem hides. Esther brings us into that and prepares us how to know God in a hiding state. It's a new type of Gilui, Megillat Esther. Chanukah the same. Preparing us for Bayit Sheni, for Churban Bayit Sheni. Rav Hutner puts it beautifully in Tachad Yitzchak. You have to be Rav Hutner to put it into such beautiful language, but very deep at the same time. He says something along the lines, I haven't seen it in years, that Chanukah are the last kelim that we receive from HaKadosh Baruch Hu on the long bridge that takes us all the way to the end of days. Because Chanukah is the last moment chronologically. the last Gilui that Hashem gives us until the Gilui at the end of days, for thousands of years of Galut, Chanukah is the last preparation that we get. It's the last Hakdamat Refu'ah LaMakah. But what's the Makah of Bayit Sheni? Why is Bayit Sheni destroyed? For Sinat Chinam, as opposed to Bayit Rishon. So the question will be, is there an aspect and an element of Hakdamat Refu'ah LaMakah that the healing and the cure is given to us before the Makah comes in of Sinat Chinam that we're going to be dealing with thousands of years till this very day as we're sitting here, unfortunately, today. And in this past year, it came forth a lot here in Eretz Yisrael, unfortunately, inside the religious community. So in what way could possibly Nerot Chanukah prepares and give us the tools and the ways that Hashem gives us to deal with that and to resolve that? But if we understand that Nerot Chanukah have to do with every Ner, that is Ner Hashem, Romez the Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam, Hitbonenut Banerot is supposed to be an 8-day exercise to get to see Neshamot, that people, human beings, ourselves and others are Neshamot, and not Gufim and not Levushim. That might start being the solution. Because when we think about it, so much of Sinat Chinam is when I see a person from far, and I don't really know him, and I categorize him and putting in a certain catalog or title or stigma above him, and as a result, I have a certain negative relationship with him, and that's very often the case. How many times I actually heard in the army, I remember over the years, Ata beseder, אבל הדתיים, או אתה בסדר, או אתם האסלאמיקים בסדר, אבל החרדים, so and so. And I would always say, what do you mean, אתה בסדר? Why am I בסדר? Because you sat with me for hours on a jeep, or we did different activities in the army together. You got to know me, you saw that I'm a human being, and even though I'm religious, I don't have horns, and we can communicate, and we're human beings, same with anybody. It's just that with them, you did not come close to them. You know them from far, and as a result, what produces, this distance produces hate. And when you think about it, what's the Naaseh Avot Siman Labanim? We'll finish with that, and that links us into Parshat HaShavua. Of the hate of Klal Yisrael that brings about Churban Habayit is the hate between Yosef and his brothers. And as Rav Hirschhorn actually pointed out to me a few years ago when I spoke about these inyanim on Erev Yom Ha'atzmaut, one of these years, he said a beautiful thing. He said that that's exactly where the whole trouble begins with. Because as we saw this past Shabbat, when Yaakov sends Yosef to check their Shlom Echav, they see him from far. Why does the pasuk say? Why does the pasuk have to bother to tell us that it's from far? That's the whole point. He said, it's a beautiful understanding. I don't think it's a word. It's mamish the depth of the pasuk. That's the whole trouble. Is that when we see people from far and we leave it as such, we don't try to put ourselves in their shoes. What's going on in their mind? Maybe they have feelings and thoughts and aspirations just as we do, and we're so therefore quick to judge because we don't put ourselves in the inside of them and we don't try to get close to get to know them. Get to know the person. You'll see things are totally different than what they look at from the outside. Why are you living your life like a guy, like a Ben Yefed, that looks at things at their garments? You're looking at him as a garment. Don't look at him as a goof. Who cares what he dresses? Who cares his kippah or shtraim or not shtraim? Did you sit down and speak to him? You know where this usually happens, unfortunately, in hospital wards. Two families, totally different types. Chiloni and Dati, Charedi, Kippah, and they're 3 weeks together in the ICU. So all of a sudden, you get to see that. And sometimes relationships come from that for forever. Your Rabbeinu has this very close friends, complete Chilonim. And I asked him a little while ago when they were here visiting him, how did you know, where do you know them from? From back in the day, I don't remember exactly what kind of a medical situation they were in. Maybe his father was going through surgery 30 years ago. They're in touch till today. Would they be in touch? For being the people would meet on the bus, he would look this way, and he would look that way. Who Charedi probably, who Chiloni. We do it all the time. I'm nichshon all the time. I'm not speaking to anybody else. I'm giving Musar only to myself. It's a daily experience for me. Even in yeshiva, you see a certain guy, you immediately put him in a certain box. Oh, he's from New York. Oh, he behaves this way. You don't sit down, talk to him, get to know him, produce a relationship. There's a whole world in there, a whole neshama. But for that, you need to see him as a neshama. I always quote, and we'll finish with that, the beautiful, beautiful hisped of the Rav Chalban, Ana Rav Mordechai Eliyahu Zatzal. Kedai lerot et ze. In one of the books, Avihem Shel Yisrael, it appears. He gives their beautiful, long, deep description of who Rav Mordechai Eliyahu was. And he says who he was more than anything else was a person who saw neshamot. Not some kubel. we're able to reach that level also if we use Chanukah properly. Just to use 8 days, lirot neshamot, to see through the garments, not to be stuck on the outside. He didn't bother him the appearance of the Jew. Who the person is as a neshama. When that happens, immediately at Marbeh Shalom Yisrael. So these two aspects of Chanukah, the fact that it has to do all with neshama and neshamot and the light of neshamot, and the aspect of Chanukah which is all about shalom, as the Rambam seems to finish off the whole halachot of Chanukah in terms of shalom. It's the same thing. If you look for the neshamot in people, immediately you're Marbeh Shalom Yisrael. No wonder that the whole image and figure behind all of Chanukah, of course, is Aaron, which is what Hillel tells us, Hevei mitalmidav shel Aaron, Ohev Shalom, Verodef Shalom, Ohev et habriot, Umekarvan laTorah. It says, and we'll really finish with that, sorry that we went for a while, that on Kafhei Kislev, says the Medrash Psikta Rabbati, they completed to build the Mishkan in the first year in the Midbar. And then Moshe wanted to put it together. Hashem says to Moshe, no, wait, put it in the storage. And they wait till Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the whole winter. Why? Clearly, more things have to happen before the Mishkan can be built for the Shekhinah to come in. And I think it's the same thing in our generation also. The land of Israel has been built. The 6-day war of miracles happened. The land is built. The fruit comes out from the land as the Chazal predicted it to be. And the Chaketz Megulam is it. So why isn't Beit HaMikdash built already? And that need for Beit HaMikdash to be built already, you can see it sometimes by certain groups that have this big need to go up to Har Bayit. My little opinion, my very little humble opinion is, why are you going up to Har Bayit? You want a Beit HaMikdash? Are we worried about the house of Beit HaMikdash? Or we should be worried about the home of Beit HaMikdash? Go work in the Shalom Bayit. Maybe instead of trying so hard to pull through beyond the policeman to get to the mountain, Tanchu Tarbum Shalom B'Yisrael. We had a Beit HaMikdash. It was taken for no other reason, for the fact that we hated each other. So go work on that. That's the building of the Beit HaMikdash. The outside building, the house, the Etzim V'Avanim is only outside coating. The inside of Beit HaMikdash, the home of Beit HaMikdash, is the Shalom Bayit of Klal Yisrael. Work on that. That's the essence of Beit HaMikdash. And Chanukah is really that opportunity to try to see ourselves, first of all, and then the people around us, and ultimately any Jew that walks around, to see him as a child, to see him as a neshama. And when I see him as a neshama, I become less judgmental, and I open myself up to a relationship with him. I can sit on a plane, there could be another fellow Jew next to me, very different than me. I can put my face in the window and not talk to him for 12 hours, or I can go out of my comfort zone and I can create a conversation. And almost always, only good comes out of those conversations. They're interesting, they're thought-provoking, and they're an opportunity for Kiddush Hashem in the world, if I behave properly. And sometimes long-term relationships come as a result. That's all the Kadosh Baruch Hu expects from us. Chanukah Sameach.